Hello there, and welcome to my overview for Combat Patrols issue 13 and 14. Now, issue 12 was a two-parter. We got one half of the Terminator unit, so we'll be continuing from there. With this issue, you get the sprue, or the remaining sprue for the Terminators, and you also get the bases. So if you're unlucky enough to have only managed to pick up issue 12, you will need to source the rest of the bits elsewhere. But as I subscribe, that's not a problem for me. Before we start issue 13 properly, we've got to go into issue 12 and finish putting together our Terminators. There's only two, so it's not going to take too much time whatsoever. So it's just a quick snip, followed by a quick clean, before finally push fitting these guys together. I do have to say the Space Marine Sergeant though was a bit fiddly. His little stalk is quite longer than the rest, so that did take a little bit of cajoling more than it normally would. But here we are. This is the full unit. Absolutely gorgeous models. Really, really love them. So upon opening issue 13, the very first thing we're needing to do is to paint our Terminator unit. We're starting with Macragge Blue. Unfortunately, this is going to be the most time-consuming process of this whole thing, and I 100% recommend buying a spray rather than doing this by hand. After Macragge Blue, we're going to be on to Abaddon Black, and we're going to be painting all of the undersuit and the sort of weapon casings. My apologies for the out of shot. I didn't realise my camera was up so high. I thought it was sort of in a better position, so I completely missed me painting the black. However, after the black, we're moving on to the Retributor armour. Honestly, though, I would actually have preferred to have done the Leadbelcher first, because there's a little bit on the guns that need to be done with Retributor armour, so if you want to swip that round for ease, I would suggest doing that. I'd also get rid of my Games Workshop starter brush as well if I were you, and buy a new one, because my one is 100% curled and is not doing a very good job. Anyway, after the Retributor armour, it's Leadbelcher. I do think the way Games Workshop or Hatchet Park works are sort of introducing gamers into painting and batch painting as well, because it is one of the things that is the most annoying thing about painting is all of the batch painting, but you know, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of patience, you'll get there in the end. Lastly, it's the Corvus White, and we don't have to paint the Terminator Sergeant's helmet, because apparently we're going to paint that red at a later date. So after where to paint, we have a quick look at the work in progress, and it shows you everywhere where you should be painted and what you can paint. So if you're unsure of where to go, have a look at that. These are the current finished models. Quite happy with the way they're coming out, but I really do hate that brush. I'm definitely going to buy a different brush. After the painting's finished, we've got some more lore to have a quick peruse over. Only a couple of pages, and then after that we go into a little short story. This is continuing on from a previous short story earlier on in the magazines. Next, it's the little naming convention for your Terminator squad. It's a fun thing if you want to do it. I'm not going to do it personally. I might do it later on once everything's complete. But for now, I'm just going to leave it. And on the back of that is the datasheet. Next is the rules, but I'm going to come back to that as I want to start with issue 14 and get all the painting out of the way before I actually play the game. So with issue 14, we get some Rakarth flesh. It's a lovely paint. It's one of my favourite paints. And we also get some Screamer pink as well. However, I've already got Screamer pink, so I'm going to be using my old version and not this brand new pot. That can go away for later. So the very first paint we'll be using is the Rakarth flesh. I'm going to be using it to paint all of the purity seals. So for painting wise, this is where things start to get tricky, but it's mostly down to the awful brush or the awful starter brush that you actually get with the stuff. And I 100% can't keep saying this, but I do recommend you buy a different brush. So as well as the paper for all the purity seals, we're also going to paint the cloak of, or the inside of the cloak for the Terminator captain and his little, I can't remember what they're called now. The name has slipped my mind, but basically the nameplate on his shoulder and on his knee as well. With the Rakarth flesh out of the way, it's time for the Screamer pink. For the Marines, it's just the tops of the purity seals. Let's just use the blurry shot. Didn't realise my camera went out of focus. This just takes a little bit of time, mostly because of that brush, but if you get a different brush, it'll be a lot faster. Finally, we get a quick in-progress look at what we've done, just to make sure that you've actually got every bit you need to do. And from there, we're on the Tyranids, and it's just Screamer Pink, and it's literally just their tongues. If you're new to these videos, I'm only going to be doing the Tyranid Prime, as I've already got a Tyranid army with a completely different colour scheme, and I want to stick to that with the rest of them, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to paint the tongue on the Tyranid Prime, and it doesn't take too long whatsoever. One of the most satisfying things I find about this hobby is when you start to get fully painted models on the battlefield. It just looks nicer, and it really does fill you with a sense of satisfaction to sort of know that you've completed an entire army, and I really do enjoy the whole painting process. And honestly, it's probably my favourite part of the actual hobby. So with the paint jobs out of the way, we're going to go back to issue 13, and this time we're going to learn about some more special rules. This time it's about leaders and the skills they can bring to the tabletop and to the units that they are attached to. It also goes through how to actually attach those units as well and when you can do it. And after that, we get a little bit about stealth and fighting first with the Von Rhein Leapers. Finally, we get to a good fight. This time it's Scenario 9, Burden of Command. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be using both the commanders for the Space Marines and the Terminators. It's our choice of who goes where. And again, we're starting to get into the whole sort of playing the game properly. We get a couple of pages of examples of how the turn should play out, as well as a few hints and tips on what to do during a battle. I do think this is one of the best ways to actually introduce new players to the game, because sometimes there are a lot of rules and they can be quite overwhelming for newcomers. And then we've got the victory blurb for whoever wins the battle. So for the Space Marines, we're using the Terminator Captain, the Librarian in Terminator armor, and of course our brand new Terminator unit. On the Tyranid side, we've got our 10 Termagants, our 5 Barb Gaunts, our 3 Von Rhein Leapers, and finally our Tyranid Prime. For the battle, I went ahead and put the Librarian with the Terminators, as it makes much more sense to use that sustained hit as it does for the reroll of the charge. So the Tyranids got the first turn, and I moved them up towards their targets. I'm not going to advance the Termagants, as I didn't really want them to get too close to the Terminators, as the Terminators will absolutely tear them apart. Or so I thought. Both the Von Rhein Leapers and the Tyranid Prime then advanced onto the objective to claim some objective points in the beginning of their next turn. And then it was time for some shooting. Now, with quite a lot of fire going in the Terminator's direction, I did actually manage to pick one off. Then it was the Space Marines' turn. I moved the Terminators up towards the first objective, and I sent the Captain towards the second objective. Even with a large amount of fire heading the way of the Termagants, they still didn't all drop. In fact, by the end of it, there was only 5 left. They kept saving or making their saves, and I honestly wish they'd actually do that for me when I'm playing a proper game. It's super annoying that they're just stubborn when I'm playing this for these videos. They did eventually drop on the second turn, however, thanks to the Terminator Librarian. The game ended with a 10-point draw, with the Terminators themselves being the stars of the game. I was only lost 1, and that was it. They just kept saving their armor saves, and I can guarantee you they're never going to do that in proper games of 40k for me. So going back to issue 14 and picking up where we left off, we've got a little bit more about the Inquisition and more of the Imperial side of things. Alongside a little bit of a sort of look at the Dark Angel Space Marine chapter, which is one of my favourites. I just really love the colour scheme, and I really do love the Deathwing Terminators. After that, we've then got a little bit more about the Tyrannic War, or the Third Tyrannic War. So there's lots more lovely lore for those who love it. And then we're learning more rules. This time it's all about deployment, which is basically how to set up. And we're also learning on how to go first and how to choose that. It gives you a few friendly little tips and advice for deployment if you've never actually played the game before. And it also then goes into infiltrators and the deep striking rules. And to make sure we put all these new rules we've just learnt into practice, scenario 10 is Deep Strike. Once again, the following 4 pages are basically examples of sort of how you can actually play the game and just how to use those infiltrators and those deep strikers to their benefits. And of course, after that, there is the usual victory blurb for whoever wins the battle. And those taking to the field will be the Terminator Captain. Only 2 of the Terminators from the Terminator unit, however, they didn't say which ones you can take, so naturally I'm going to take the Sergeant, and I'm also going to take that amazing Assault Cannon. And then finally, 5 Infernus Marines. And opposing them are 10 Termagants, the 5 Barbgaunts, and lastly, my favourites, the Von Ryan Leapers. So, following the rules, I rolled to see who got to deploy first, which turned out to be the Space Marines. However, I kept the Terminators back in reserve and then just carried on deploying all of the Tyranids except the Von Ryan Leapers, who would be deployed with the Infiltrators rule. The Space Marines ended up with the first turn, so naturally I brought in the Terminators via the Deep Strike rules and instantly sort of claimed an objective. And from there, it was pretty much just a big slog, big firefight, and it ended up with the Tyranids getting completely tabled. In fact, the only casualty for the Space Marines was 1 Terminator. And with the battle out of the way, the final page is a sneak peek for the next 2 issues, which appears to be a Tyranid Psycho phase, so a lovely big nid, and unfortunately, more paints. They definitely are front-loading this, I suppose, which is a good thing, so that means we're going to get all the paints earlier rather than later. It does kind of suck that we only got 1 unit this time around. However, with those paints, those units that we've already got are starting to look absolutely fantastic on the battlefield, and this is a very perfect way of teaching people how to paint very slowly, because you don't have to worry about shading and highlighting when you're just starting out. Overall, this month has been an okay delivery, and I can't wait for the next week, because I absolutely love that Psychophage miniature. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. I've got painting guides up on there as well, so you can check those out, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.